try to share with you a few insights from the Arab region in the way we see the response from the heart of God to two global epidemics, the drugs and the HIV epidemics. These two epidemics, we can see few of the characteristics of globalizations in them. One of them is the product-centered lifestyles. Heroin was invented as a medicine for common cold in the 19th century, under the claims that it is less addictive than morphine. Cocaine was put in cola drinks up till 1938. The major response to HIV, and which failed largely in Africa, is through products. They bombard people with condoms even though they don't use condoms. One expert told me, we did everything to make people use condoms in Kenya and they are not. So I told her, are they in Kenya eating with forks and knives or using their hands? She told me they are using their hands. So I told her, how do you expect them to use utensils and equipment in a much intimate activity? And we are in the age of stereotyping, the age of the mighty media. HIV is a weak virus, scientifically. I'm a medical doctor. Scientifically, it's a weak virus. Its strength came out of the fear and the propaganda coming out of the media of the early days and the religious media that said it was the wrath of God. And then we are in the age of the multinationals responding in the church and outside the church to the HIV and drugs response. Now I'll tell you three stories. This is a tradition of the West and the tradition of the postmodern era too, storytelling. So the first story is when I was a young man in 1989, and I was sort of a preacher and a psychiatrist, and I was in a youth camp in our church, a very nice youth camp, 250 young men by the beach side, and then I was told 5 hardcore heroin addicts came to the camp, and I was very upset, because one of them could ruin our nice camp, so how about 5 of them? So, but then I knew these people, I have some interaction with them to contain them from ruining the camp, and then I was asked to preach on Jesus can set you free. And I was praying before the sermon, and the Lord asked me, do you believe that I can set these people free? And the answer came right from my heart, no. So it was very difficult. So I had 30 minutes of struggle with the Lord, and then I went in faith, yes, Lord, you can. And after the sermon, 50, 60 people stayed in, gave their lives to Jesus the Liberator in tears. Among them was those 5 heroin addicts, and up till now, 21 years later, they are still free, and the big ministry started from there. Right now, we have 440 beds, 3,000 addicts freed from drugs, and an impact on the whole nation. Now, this is one of the stories that God raised from all over the world, people like me, from the Ukraine, from Russia, particularly Ukraine and Russia, but also from Latin America, South Africa, all over the world. We came together as Christians and we established what is called Isaac, the promise of the impossible becoming possible, the International Substance Abuse and Addiction Coalition, as a response to this. Also, we have 550 members in 77 countries. I'll talk more about that in the dialogue session after this session. However, and there is ASSET, AIDS Care and Education and Training. 2 dialogue sessions are running in this. These are major global presence of Jesus in response to these epidemics. 40 to 60% of the HIV services in the world are given through Christians. However, during my work, the UNDP wanted some help in mobilizing religious leaders to produce anti-stigma messages and raise the dignity of people living with HIV among religious leaders. So they summoned me up. Long story short, I became more and more involved with them. One of the stories I want to tell you is about an imam from Yemen who was very astonished that the facilitator is an evangelical Christian. It was the first time in his life to meet such a creature. But he made friends with me, and he made friends with other Christian leaders, and he was deeply touched and got very compassionate about people living with HIV. And in one of these sessions, we brought in drug users, And they started to give their testimonies, former drug users. And then two or three came up and said, we were in prison, this is what happens there, we need protection, we need dignity, we need such and such. And then one of the consultants, a human rights expert and an eminent lawyer, came to the platform, and he was one of the facilitators of the sessions, and said, I was a drug user myself, I got changed, I got transformed by the power of God, and I became now a consultant with you and myself. And this started to change the way people look at human beings, even drug users who are hopeless. And this Imam, Sheikh Al-Jabri, he's called, and he's a good friend of mine, became the Imam who defends people living with HIV, and he had, in another session, we had legislators. So this is the way multinationals can work for Christian values and transforming the nations. We had legislators, and I was facilitating. And the one parliamentarian from Yemen told me, Dr. Roel, what you're saying is good and nice, and we want to protect people living with HIV from discrimination and all what you say, but religious leaders will tear us apart. So I gave him Sheikh Al-Jabri immediately on my mobile. Sheikh Al-Jabri told him they are good people. And a law was produced in Yemen to protect the rights of people living with HIV, which is human rights respecting in one of the most underdeveloped countries in the world. In another session, I was facilitating the session, again, very amazingly, a Christian evangelical facilitating a session for imams in North Africa. All of them were imams from Morocco, Tunis, Algeria, and Libya. And then the first lady, they were people living with HIV. The first man said, I used drugs in Libya, I got infected. The lady said, my husband died. They told me he died of AIDS. Do the test. I did the test. I found out to be positive. The third one told them, I was 20 years old. My husband died, left me 3 children. I was in a remote village in Morocco. Nobody helped me. My children were hungry. I sold my body. I became a sex worker and got infected by HIV. And now I'm in my later stages of HIV, and I'm seeking the forgiveness of God. And I seek your own forgiveness because you are my religious leaders. Now, I was facilitating this session. The day before, the imams were preaching about the wrath of God on unrighteousness, and that AIDS is the punishment of God. And 2 of the preachers of wrath of God asked to speak. So I gave the word to the first one, and praying in my heart, Lord, help me here. So the man stood up and he said, dear lady, I want you to forgive us for letting society do this to you. The other man, a big man with a big beard, fervent preacher of the wrath of God, stood up and asked for the word. I gave it to him. He said nothing. He choked with tears and sat down. From that day on, a compassionate wave came on the religious leaders, the imams of Morocco. They were all trained, and UNAIDS, another global body, reports that 2 major breakthroughs in the Arab region in the HIV response took place in Morocco and Yemen specifically. Now, what I want to say, this is my moment of glory in the League of Arab States, and this is the religious leaders we have trained. Jesus spent time with lepers, sinners, tax collectors, and prostitutes. We should spend more time as church with people living with HIV, drug users, and sex workers, particularly in this age of globalization. I finish up with one story. One of my colleagues, another media consultant, and she's a devout Muslim. She told me, actually in the funeral of her son who died tragically, she told me, I dreamt of you, Ihab. So I told her, what did you see in the dream? She said, I was in Mecca, and I dreamt of you coming along, and you brought with you Jesus and his 12 disciples. And I asked you in the dream, How do you bring these people in to this place? And you told me in the dream, I am not responsible, she saw that. You told me in the dream, this is who we are, evangelicals. We speak reasonably, but we change lives. And as a psychiatrist, I can analyze this dream about the collective archetypes and subconscious, and I can give you an article. But in the age of globalization, this, in the Arab region, this is what I think we evangelicals can do. Speak reasonably, speak with an understandable language in the world of globalization. And two, bring in the transforming presence of Jesus and the transforming presence of the community of the sacred, of the Holy Communion. Bring in the transforming presence of the real church as seen in the Last Supper. Thank you very much.